Okay, for everyone's benefit, the meeting is now being recorded.
So may I go ahead with my
Yes,
question?
go ahead, Fritz.
Trevor, obviously I'm on the planning board. You made a presentation last night. Do we anticipate that Arcadis will be providing ideas to the planning board or to the planning department regarding the types of zoning restrictions or changes that may be required or may have been successful in other communities? For instance, I know in the town of Situate, just because I just happened to come across that they use a method, they use a coastal resilience overlay, map overlay, zoning overlay. So is it anticipated that you'll be providing us with not samples, but ideas of what we might be thinking of?
Yes, down the road as we go through the process, I think once we get into really the solution development phase of the project, which will be, again in the spring through the summer, we would definitely look to the planning board to provide input on those, preliminary recommendations before they're finalized.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Okay, I will call the meeting to order. We have a quorum. This is the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee meeting on Tuesday, January 12th. I will read the script that is required by the Commonwealth. For this meeting, the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee is convening by video conference via the Zoom app as posted on the town's website, identifying how the public may join. Members of the public wishing to participate in the meeting must use their full name for Zoom access. If full names are not used, people will not be allowed to participate in the discussion. The town reserves the right to remove any member of the public from the meeting who doesn't use a full name or acts inappropriately. Just a note that if you do want to contribute to the discussion, the best way to do that would be to send me, Mary Longacre, a message through the chat indicating that you'd like to speak. We do not have a raise hand feature in this format. I'm Mary Longacre, the chair of the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee. To get started, I'll confirm that all members and persons anticipated on the agenda are present and can hear me. Members, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Gary Beller.
Present.
Sarah Boyce.
Present.
Peter Brace.
Present.
Graham Dervich is notified as she will not be able to attend this morning. Matt Fee.
Present.
Ian Golding.
Yes.
Jen Carberg.
Here.
Fritz McClure.
Here.
All right, staff, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Vince Murphy.
Here.
Holly Backus.
Present.
And anticipated speakers on the agenda, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Trevor Johnson.
Here.
Lisa Craig.
Here.
And Trevor, do you have members of your team also here presenting?
It'll just be me presenting, but we do have a couple members of our team, Chelsea Kilborn from STOS, listening in and taking notes, as well as Anise Sunny from Arcadis, who will just be listening in as well.
Okay, thank you, Trevor. This open meeting of the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee is being conducted remotely, consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 12th, 2020, due to the current state of emergency in the Commonwealth due to the outbreak of the COVID-19 virus. In order to mitigate the transmission of the COVID-19 virus, we have been advised and directed by the Commonwealth to suspend public gatherings, and as such, the governor's order suspends the requirement of the open meeting law to have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location. Further, all members of public bodies are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. The order, which you can find posted with the agenda materials for this meeting, allows public bodies to meet entirely remotely so long as reasonable public access is afforded so that the public can follow along with the deliberation of the meeting. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. Time permitting, this meeting will feature public comment. Please note that the meeting is being recorded and all attendees are participating by video conference. Accordingly, please be aware that other people may be able to see you, and take care not to share the screen of your computer or other device. Anything you broadcast may be captured by the recording. All supporting materials that have been provided to members of this body are available on the town's website unless otherwise noted. The public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda unless the chair notes otherwise. Before we move to the first item on the agenda, I will cover some ground rules for effective and clear conduct. I will introduce each speaker on the agenda. After they conclude their remarks, the chair will go down the line of members, inviting each by name to provide any comment, questions, or motions. Please hold until your name is called. Further, please remember to mute your phone or computer when you are not speaking, and please remember to speak clearly and in a way that helps generate accurate minutes. For any response, please wait until the chair yields the floor to you and state your name before speaking. If members wish to engage in a conversation with other members, please do so through the chair, taking care to identify yourself. For items with public comment, after members have spoken, the chair will afford public comment to those members of the public who have joined the meeting via Zoom. Members of the public who wish to speak must state their names and be acknowledged by and speak through the chair. Finally, each vote taken in this meeting will be conducted by roll call vote. And I also want to remind the public that they can submit comments in advance or after a meeting by email to vmurphy@nantucket-ma.gov. Thank you all very much. The first item on our agenda is the approval of the minutes from December 22nd. And I also want to give Fritz a big shout out for continuing to take the minutes this year. For the rest of us, they just magically appear, and we appreciate that very much, Fritz, so thank you. Did we have any comments or corrections on the minutes? I had mentioned to Vince the correction of the spelling for Hillary Rayport's name. And I also had a question for Sarah. There is a note at the bottom of page 2 of the minutes under the Education Subcommittee. Sarah Boyce reported that the work of the Education Subcommittee has been sent to Arcadis, and I just wanted to verify that. I didn't remember that personally being sent to Arcadis.
So I did not say that, and it hasn't been sent to Arcadis.
Okay. Yeah, we haven't adopted that work by the full
No,
committee
so
level. Yeah.
I think maybe part of the confusion was the work that we've done so far has been working. Some of it has been working with the town. So I don't know what that particular sentence was meant to reflect, but
Should we strike that?
I would just completely strike it.
Okay.
Vince, did you have anything else to add regarding that? I don't know. I think the only thing I had spoken about was that, you know, we were working with Florencia and finalizing the work we've done so far.
It's off topic for minutes, but super duper quick update. I was chatting to Florencia again last week and again yesterday, trying to get her to finish that, and it's she's hoping to get it. She was hoping to get it yesterday, but obviously something got the better of her. But I don't want to speak with too much confidence this week.
Mary, it's Fritz.
Yep.
I'm just looking at my notes. I may have misunderstood. I just had work gone to Arcadis, so I may have just misunderstood what.
Yeah, I think if we just strike that sentence, that's sufficient.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other comments or corrections on the minutes? Seeing none, is there a motion to adopt the minutes as modified in the meeting today?
So moved.
Thank you, Sarah. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Jen. By roll call vote, those in favor, please say aye. Gary Beller,
Aye.
Sarah Boyce,
Aye.
Peter Brace. Peter,
Aye.
Matt Fee.
Abstain, I wasn't there.
Thank you, Matt. Ian,
Abstain, I wasn't there.
Jen,
Aye.
Fritz,
Aye.
and chair votes aye. Thank you. Those are adopted. That's 6-4 and 2 abstentions. Okay, the next item on the agenda is an update on public outreach and data collection for the Coastal Resilience Plan, and I will ask Trevor Johnson to give us that update. Please go ahead, Trevor, and share your screen as needed.
All right. Thank you, Mary, and good to see members of the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee again. we last spoke in late November. And also I've had the opportunity to see many of your faces and chat with many of you through our phase 1 listening tour, which I'll talk about in the course of the presentation. I will say that some of the slides that were sent in advance include what I'm hoping will be a sort of a group discussion. And I guess for the purposes of facilitating that, I will sort of lay out the prompts and then turn it over to Mary, who can kind of facilitate input from each of the CRAC members, which maybe is a little bit less interactive, but I think is the most organized way to seek input in the virtual setting here. Does that sound okay? Okay. I'll share my screen here. Just give me one moment. Okay, let me know when you're able to see my screen, and you should see the whole slide rather than the slide and the sort of next slide view. That should be, I think it's correct.
Yes, you're in presentation mode now.
All right, great. Okay, so yes, today we will cover a couple different things, and we actually do have quite a bit to cover, and I know I want to leave plenty of time for Lisa to present as well. So we'll try to move through this fairly rapidly in an hour, and we will be sharing these slides. I'll be sharing these slides with Vince afterwards. That can be shared out, and we can certainly answer any questions as follow-up. So we want to provide an update on community engagement process and some of the themes that are emerging from our early listening tour and community conversations. We want to work together to co-develop the approach and think about the outreach strategy for our next phase of community engagement. Then we'll have a conversation around our preliminary evaluation criteria. And then in closing, we'll provide sort of a brief overview, snapshot of kind of our project process, progress, and our next steps. So just a reminder about our project principles. You know, we don't need to belabor these. I know you've seen them, but just honoring community heritage identity through adaptation, addressing resilience at multiple scales, having an inclusive and responsive stakeholder engagement process, and bringing a commitment to implementation. And our mission statement, which I won't read, it hasn't changed since our last conversation, but just a reminder that this is something that we will look to begin most, if not all, meetings with as a grounding in what it is that we're trying to accomplish together through the Nantucket Coastal Resilience Plan. So I want to transition now to an update on our community engagement, which many members of the CRAC have been involved in through their other lives here on Nantucket. And I think we've had some really good conversations and learned a lot. So it's been quite busy. We've talked to quite a few people, but it's been I think a very valuable exercise in the early phase of the project. So a reminder about the kind of arc of our and I should say that these slides were not shared in advance. They're all sort of update in focus. So just a reminder that we're in phase 1 of the listening tour, which began in November and extends into this month. We'll also be continuing to sort of entertain listening tour style conversations throughout our process. So just because we're kind of wrapping up phase 1 does not mean that we're going to stop listening. Of course, we'll be listening throughout the process. And we'll start to enter kind of our phase 2 of engagement, which is more oriented towards community-wide outreach and input. So looking at the tools that we'll discuss here today is looking at the tools and activities that are best suited to generate that type of input. And just listed here on the left side of the slide is are the organizations and departments and boards and commissions that we've spoken with, presented to, and listened to as we've undertaken our phase 1 listening tour. So just a brief reminder on our goals. And again, these are all laid out in our community engagement plan that is hosted on the town's website now, in an effort to be fully transparent about what our process will look like. We are looking to identify the key questions that require deeper understanding through our ongoing engagement. So we're using our sort of preliminary conversations with those who have really been at the table on the question of coastal resilience for a long time to focus the questions that we want to be answering through later phases of engagement. Collecting that need to know information on risks and vulnerabilities. Understanding preliminarily what is important to the community. I think we have not yet spoken to the community at large, but many of the folks that we've spoken to in phase one have been involved, as I mentioned, for quite a while. So they have a perspective on what's important to the community, and that's very helpful to us. Building consensus on the goals of the coastal resilience plan. There's obviously a lot of different things that the coastal resilience plan needs to do. So helping to co-refine and shape those through this first phase has been useful. We want to create relationships, and I think we've been successful at meeting and kind of getting the perspectives of a lot of the players who will be really important to not just this planning process, but to the implementation of the projects down the road. I mean, just last night we presented to the planning board. The planning board is going to have to be deeply involved in any changes to the zoning bylaw that may be recommended. So we need to build that relationship early on and continue to cultivate it through the process. And then finally, project champions, which is really related to the relationship. So looking for those folks who we can help empower and build capacity for in order to be the champions for implementation of recommendations from the plan. And just again on the schedule, we are currently in the black box here, the black dashed box, wrapping up phase one, entering into phase two here in the new year that'll extend through February and potentially a little bit into March, and much more focused on community-wide outreach through a variety of activities. So we've undertaken our listening tour in an entirely virtual setting, which I think has gone about as well as it could go. There are a couple technological road bumps, but nothing that impacted our ability to communicate. Apologies to those who may not love the screenshot pictures, but I just wanted to show a little bit of who we've been talking to and how our conversations have gone. This is the Nantucket Land Bank conversation, and then a conversation with Town Manager Gibson and her staff in the administrative town administration. This slide is similar to one that I've been sharing through our listening tour, but I did just want to note for, I know many members of the CRAC, but any members of the public who are listening, we have launched the website for the project. There's a lot of information on there, so please do check it out. I would also flag the contact information collection form that we've launched, which is not a survey, but really just an opportunity for us to gather contact information that we will use to share information throughout this process. So any members of the public, please do check that out. And I'd say we've received, I think, about 20 responses to that form so far, and so really looking to get as much contact information as we can. Just a bit of reporting out on our, I guess, the metrics related to our first phase. So we did establish some goals through our phase one engagement, through our community engagement plan for phase one. And those were to inform 200 individuals about the process and to deeply engage between 30 to 50 people. And so the 200 people informed, I would say, would be members of the public who have attended a public meeting that we've presented at, or someone who's visited the project website. And then the deeply engaged individuals would be people that, we've had really, hour-long conversations and incorporated, deep kind of insight and perspective and input from through our conversations. And I think we've been largely successful. We lack a little bit of visibility on how many people have visited the website at this time, but I think it's safe to say some have. So we've certainly been able to have detailed project briefings and interviews with 50 plus staff and community members across those 18 departments, boards, and commissions and organizations. We've had a lot of fantastic conversations. We'll continue to have a couple more over the next 2 weeks with HDC and the Harbor and Shellfish Advisory Board, as well as 1 or 2 other town departments. But we're certainly wrapping up this phase 1 and transitioning into our next phases. Again, launched the website and contact information collection form. We have or will present at 6 public meetings with, I think, based on my count, a total of 125 plus attendees and participants. And then finally, we'll have an email blast that is planned for this week that will go out to other organizations and groups, including neighborhood associations, those who we haven't had a chance to speak with yet, to make sure that they're aware of the process and that they will also be aware about our upcoming open house, which I'll talk about in a moment. So just during our listening tour, again, many of you have been privy to these questions or been asked them, but some of the things that we're asking is, what is your understanding of coastal risk on Nantucket? What are your current plans to address that risk? What is your willingness to participate in the process, to leverage resources, cooperate with other entities to mitigate risk and advance resilience? Trying to understand if there are current policies, regulations, or programs that stakeholders believe could lessen or that exacerbate risk. Really, I think this has been a really interesting question is, what solutions are off the table for you? And I've actually been surprised that most people have, either said that, they want to learn more and understand what the range of possible options are, or that they're open to a lot of they're open to solutions. So they have a willingness to see what the plan sort of where it leads, rather than precluding options before we start. Thoughts on obstacles to success, and then finally, I think one of the most important ones that we've asked is just what each group, what assistance, expertise, observation, and other help they can offer to the development of the CRP. And I would also add that we've asked towards the implementation of the recommendations of the CRP. And through these conversations, there have been, I think, a number of key themes and messages that we've been able to start to identify, and we'll be developing a report out on our phase 1 that will summarize a lot of these themes and messages and kind of the quote unquote what we heard, that we'll share with the CRAC in the coming weeks. But not surprisingly, on risks, there's a lot of concern over sea level rise, erosion, and flooding. I would say, depending on what your organization's or department's orientation is, you may be more concerned about erosion or sea level rise, but there's certainly a lot of focus on each of these hazards. I think we heard a lot about this kind of importance about the critical infrastructure, really understanding what the impacts to the community lifelines on Nantucket will be. We had an in-depth conversation, for example, with the emergency preparedness coordinator of the town, Sergeant Coakley, around the ferry terminal and just access to the terminal, and that is really the lifeline of the community of the island. And so that's something we understood, but I think helpful to just have highlighted as a focus. The environment, certainly there's been a lot of attention and prioritization for nature-based solutions. I think one of the themes has been that the default should be where we can accomplish nature-based solutions, or allowing nature to take its course in some cases, but that we provide suitable and appropriate protection for critical and built assets where necessary. So not taking other sort of gray or structural solutions off the table, but providing an emphasis for nature-based solutions. And then related to that, just understanding the ecological impacts of climate change. What is sea level rise going to do to existing wetland resource areas, for example? And then thinking about integration of sustainability and climate change mitigation. So obviously the resilience and adaptation piece is one side of the coin. The other side is what are we going to do to try to mitigate future climate change. And we've spoken with the town sustainability coordinator, and we'll think about opportunities to achieve potential sustainability outcomes through co-beneficial resilient solutions. In the on the focus of, or the theme of community, again, Nantucket's natural, historic, and aesthetic character, trying to really make sure that solutions are tailored to that. I think Lisa will talk a little bit more about this during her presentation as well, but just really understanding what that character is, why it's special, and making sure that we're paying attention to it and integrating it into our process and solutions. There's we were reminded that significant, most of the land on Nantucket is privately owned. And so the town has limited ability to influence what happens on private property, except for through regulation and property owner education. So really providing educational and guidance to property owners to advance their own awareness of what options exist for them. Again, comprehensive engagement, trying to bring people to the table who haven't been engaged before through resilience or other planning processes. And we'll talk about this in a moment. And then just the tension between the growth on the island and the need to reduce development in certain areas. There's certainly a key theme around this I guess concern over future development and where it goes, and a recognition that there are some areas that just are not suitable for that development to occur. And then the final theme is coordination. So we want to be emphasizing adaptable and actionable planning. We heard that there's a need for giving the town the tools that it needs to take immediate action upon the conclusion of the planning process, and perhaps even before, if there are things that we identify before the planning process is complete. We will certainly be equipping the town with what they need around those findings. Again, regulation and zoning changes. This isn't just a process about developing technical or design engineering solutions, but also solutions that can be achieved through regulation. I think we heard one of the things, and this came largely from town departments, was the need for consistency, policy consistency across departments, across commissions and boards, so that everyone is working towards common goals. And I think this gets to a larger question of really what we'll try to answer through our next phase of engagement, which is, what is the vision? What is the long-term vision? And that vision then drives what the goals are and how you achieve those goals through consistent application of policy and capital improvement. Interdepartmental coordination, again, that's part and parcel of this policy consistency towards common goals. And then again, also integration of plans and planned projects. So there's, I think, a sense that there's been a lot of planning happening, but it hasn't been knitted together into a complete holistic strategy. And to me, at least, I think that is kind of the core of the CRP is a comprehensive strategy that knits together a lot of the work that's already been done, as well as new findings revealed through the process. So I think that's my last slide on this update. Let me pause there and see if there are any questions from the crack.
For those members that have the video on, if you just want to raise your hand to let me know that you have something to say. And I'm not seeing any. If anybody doesn't have their video on, feel free to give me a shout out. Gary, go ahead, please.
Let me just unmute myself. I sent a note to Vince this morning about my biggest concern. And let me just read to you the note that I sent to Vince. I said, before the communities are asked to provide their preferences regarding dealing with coastal resiliency issues, it would be vitally important for them to have an understanding of the risks to their community of rising tide and coastal erosion issues. So how will this be accomplished? Will Arcadia do it? Or is it the responsibility of the town, perhaps, the Natural Resources Department? Although the issue may arise in numerous communities on island, I'd like to use Brant Point as an example in view of my familiarity with it as a homeowner there. Now, Brant Point as a community, for the most part, consists of seasonal residents only. It has no community conservation association like Nantucket, and its community board association doesn't even have one full-time resident homeowner on its board. So who will explain to the community the risks to them arising from rising tide and coastal erosion? Who will explain to them the implications of the recently distributed FEMA erosion hazard maps? If Arcadia meets with the Brant Point Association board, as well as community homeowners, they will likely hear about symptoms with which the residents have dealt with, such as stormwater drainage issues, including inadequate pumping equipment, street flooding from major storms made worse by inadequate or non-existent street drains, and rising tide effects resulting in street flooding even on non-stormy and non-rainy days. Are there areas in Brant Point where it is likely that in the next 20 to 50 years, coastal erosion will cause the loss of beaches, home sites, or whole neighborhoods? Understanding these risks will be the basis for the community's participation in the decision-making process that will require acceptance of future steps and action plans of this and other communities. Thus, my concern about the need for a mechanism for creating an understanding by each island community of the coastal resiliency issues it is likely to face.
Thank you, Gary. Other comments? Matt, please.
And I think Gary has a really good point. We need to agree kind of what the baseline is, what the facts are. And I'll give you another example that's, it's easy for the voters to think, oh, it's Brant Point and that's all rich people. And we care about them, but it's Brant Point. That we're going to have the same thing happen in a lot of all through the upper sort of top end of Myocomet Pond. The select board already have a lot of complaints about flooding there certain times a year. And I think those wetlands are all naturally going to want to expand, which means it's going to go into yards and into their basements and areas that we're, sort of targeting for growth and for affordable housing. Some of those areas may be wetlands. And so we've got to sort of, I think it's really important that people realize what areas are going to be under pressure before we start picking and choosing solutions. And I'm glad to see the numbers attached and the numbers is going to be part of how we're going to decide this. Although I think low, medium, high, under 10,000, I think our number is going to be a lot higher than those. But I was glad to see those in the packet. Thank you.
Peter?
Good. Just jumping off of what Matt just said and what Gary just said, and it jumped out at me. Yeah, I know a lot of people are going to say, yeah, that's just the rich people that are affected. They're down on Brant Point or they're in Nantucket on Smith's Point. So we know that. We know that that's an old argument. We've heard that before, but now you have to find the things that are going to hurt, that unfortunately that are going to hurt everybody, like the steamship authority, like access to downtown, places that they go, that everybody goes. You have to find that I guess that common nerve and touch it so everybody feels it. Do you know what I'm saying?
Thank you, Peter. Vince, I see your hand up. I'm going to wait to go to you. There's something that I've been thinking about, having seen a couple of the conversations that Arcadis has had with other boards. And it dovetails a little bit with what you just said, Peter, and also Matt and Gary. You mentioned heritage, Trevor, and this island was actually founded as a corporation, not as a settlement. It was founded with a profit motive. And that is something that I think has been a very strong thread throughout the island's history. Whaling was certainly motivated by profit. The thread that we have now that attaches to that is the real estate and building industry, primarily, and of course the tourism industry as well. I think that if we can find solutions that enable people to make money, as crass as that might sound, that is going to be a benefit into getting things adopted. And I'll use as an example the idea that I wasn't aware of previously, but apparently Alfie Sanford had thrown out the idea or proposed the idea of building another marina on the North Shore in conjunction with a potential additional steamship terminal. And I'm just turning that over in my mind that, you know, on the one hand, that's a bit of an outrageous idea, but I hope that we are looking for outrageous ideas for inspiration. But on the other hand, it makes a lot of sense because it, you know, I don't know the environmental impact of that, and there are certainly many questions, but if we had an opportunity to enhance the island's economy by providing additional business opportunities and at the same time satisfy resilience needs, that would be something that would probably be enthusiastically accepted. And so that's the thread, I think, of, you know, this island is really heavily motivated by money. And by that, I don't mean people who already have money, but people who believe that they are entitled to monetize what they have here on Nantucket, whether it's the real estate that they own or their livelihood, or just the opportunity that is here, because we do have such a strong source of funding from the people that come here and want to be here. I think that's something we need to just keep in mind very seriously, is that if the coastal resilience plan is only about spending money defensively, it will not be as enthusiastically received as if it's about integrating the values of our community into plans to help protect the community. And again, I apologize if that sounds a little bit crass, but I think that is really true. Vince, can we go to you?
Thank you, Mary. With the exception of what Mary said, Gary, Peter, and Matt were both talking about things that, you know, effectively risk assessment. And one of Matt's points was about expanding wetlands. That's kind of a separate thing for the stormwater management plan. But certainly, I would hope that Trevor could talk about the risk assessment and how that might be progressing. And see, and thankfully that's the all island side of things. So there'll be an all island risk assessment. So Trevor might be able to say something about that. And then to Gary's point about using, sorry, there's a phone ringing out, it's not mine. Then to Gary's point about using Brand Point as an example, I frequently do and will continue to education for people in Brand Point who are not present year round. I'll happily take a mailing list for all residents there and start a conversation if that was of benefit to you, Gary. And I'm happy to do that for pretty much any homeowner group as well.
Other comments?
Just a quick,
Fritz, please. I'm sorry, Matt, I just recognized Fritz and then we'll come back to you.
I just, something that occurs to me, and in terms of risk assessment, and I mean, one of the questions that probably will need to be resolved or addressed in some way, that is the question that involves tens of millions of dollars. And that is, ultimately, will the community need to face relocation of sewer, pumping sewer, the way our sewers runs from town, out of town, since that all runs along Water Street at the lowest levels our flooding area? And also, will there be a need ultimately to relocate the electric cable that comes in at the base of, by the harbor there, base of, on Washington Street? And I don't know how that gets addressed, but that is a tens of millions of dollar kind of question. And can you build around it and keep it safe? Or is it going to have to be moved? And so I just wanted to make sure that somehow that's kept in focus, so that we will address in some way that question ultimately.
Thank you, Fritz and Matt.
Yeah, just I'll answer Fritz kind of. I've asked that question to both National Grid and to the town's consultants, and they both said the recent work they've done takes us up to, 5 or 6 feet. So it's probably a mid-range, mid-range problem. I think we should consider it, but I think they've been doing some work on it already. Number one, and then just back to, I don't think that the wetlands is going to just be a storm, sort of a storm. Oh, what do you call it? A wastewater. I don't think it's just a water situation, removing the water. It's going to want to expand, and it is due to sea level rise. The erosion on the end of Sackatcher Pond is, directly attributable, I believe, to, sort of the storms and the things that are happening. And in a situation like that, maybe we're raising those roads earlier rather than later to let them start going into the moors, start making more wetlands. I mean, that may be what we need to be thinking about. I know we're doing that, but I think that there are places that people can't even imagine are impacted by sort of storm surge, sea level rise, pathways. I think there's a lot of neighborhoods that, that are going to be shocked in the next 5, 10, 20 years of the impacts they're going to be facing. And I think if they understand that those impacts are coming, they're going to be more likely to accept things with or without the, and if with or without the profit motive. I think they're going to accept it. But when it's just sort of Nantucket or it's, Brant Point or Nantucket, I could see where a lot of people can kind of push it out of their mind. Well, it's not us. We're sitting here in the Mid-Island. We're okay. And I think that, a lot of them have to realize that they're not okay. And that's going to be part of the messaging, is that this is going to impact all of us.
Thank you, Matt. Other comments? And Trevor, if we need to move on, let me know. Gary, we'll go to you.
I had one other thought. I think at a meeting some time ago, one of our members, perhaps it was Ian, talked about the possibility, although it's quite probably a very difficult choice. Fritz was talking about tens of millions of dollars. Now I'm talking about $1 billion solution, and that is talking about gating off the harbor the way they did in Holland. And although it would be extremely expensive to do so, if we had 25 or 50 years to do so, that certainly would be the way Holland has addressed its issue with the storms coming in to a town that is below sea level. And Nantucket, in theory, could do the same thing if it was willing to even consider that. Who will be making those kinds of decisions? Will there be a serious discussion about that at the select board? Will we be talking about it as a committee?
Trevor, if you want to respond to that, and then I think we'll go on with the rest of your presentation or questions.
Sure, that sounds good. Thanks everybody for the comments. I think just on the question of risk, that's very much the next phase of our project, and we'll be, undertaking the kind of, risk and vulnerability assessment that I'll talk about briefly at the end of this presentation, just to give you a kind of sense of where we're headed, and that'll be the subject of our next, conversation with the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee in March, April timeframe. On the question of, harbor barrier, I think, that is something that we can evaluate, I think at a high high sort of conceptual level, it's a challenging in a context like Nantucket, where high ground, you have to tie into high ground with a barrier. And so in a place like Nantucket, high ground is hard to find. You can have overtopping of CO2 and the barrier sort of island system. So it's something that as we get into solutions, we can have our technical experts look at and evaluate and kind of tee that conversation up with the constraints that may exist for consideration by the CRAC and select board and whoever the appropriate bodies are.
Matt has something to say. Trevor, do you want to take another comment or go ahead?
Sure. Yeah. Why don't you go
Okay.
ahead, Matt?
Just a quick one. I think, because you ask what is off the table, I think one thing that's off the table is moving the historic downtown. So, so if we take that, if a majority of people say that's off the table, then I think that will lead into, what you're discussing. And it might not be a big barrier out in the ocean. It might be the base of Cliff Road over to the base of, Orange Street past the wetlands or something. It might be some other different thing where we're doing we're going out a bit and putting a living reef and a sea and some sort of, barrier. But, I think that those things at high level, that's where I think the thought should be going.
Yeah.
The downtown is something I don't think we want to move. Where do we move it? So.
Yeah, that's a good point. I guess the other way of that we've kind of talked about that in our conversations has been through the lens of what's on the table, and protection of the downtown from climate change impacts, flooding and sea level rise has very much been on the table as a potential solution.
And I'll just follow up on my comment about outrageous ideas. One of the things that somebody mentioned in a prior meeting was that the Reverend Ted Anderson said, we're going to have to move all of us off Nantucket. And that was kind of a shocker of an idea, that the concept of moving the historic downtown buildings themselves off the island somewhere else. But it does make you stop and pause and think and say, well, is there any kernel of that we can adapt and apply that makes sense? The Dreamland Theater being a great example of a building that's been moved several times and perhaps needs to be moved again. It's in a really bad place right now. And anyway, I'm sorry, Trevor, go ahead with your presentation.
No, it's a good conversation, and I appreciate all the input. Yeah, I do want to move into this next kind of section of the presentation. We are entering the next phase of our engagement process here, community-wide input, and I just want to kind of frame this as, I would love it if each of the members of the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee kind of saw themselves as being an ambassador for this phase of engagement, and that each person kind of takes on a role in helping to make sure that the community overall is aware of what's happening. And so we have a exercise at the end where I'm hoping we can kind of each kind of take on a specific stakeholder group and think about how we want to make sure that, at a minimum, they're aware of the upcoming January 28th open house, but also just that overall that there's a awareness of the process and how to be involved. So with that, let me jump through. So I won't read this entire slide. You had it in advance, and it hasn't changed since then. But the focus of the phase 2 engagement is community-wide awareness and visioning. We want to make sure that we are generating broad awareness on and off island of the planning process. We want to discuss a long-term vision for Nantucket, introduce the risk and resilience concepts, generate shared understanding of the risk and resilience toolkit, talk about evaluation criteria, or, in less kind of technical terms, talk about what is important. What are your priorities? What are the community's priorities? And then finally, ensure that the community knows how to stay informed and involved. And I would say one of the key challenges here is how to make sure we're reaching underserved members of the community, those who have not participated in planning efforts before. Many of the folks that we've talked to and that are represented on this committee, obviously you've been at the table for a long time, and you've been kind of a part of the resilience planning process here on Nantucket for years. But there are members of the community that we've heard from other members of, we've heard through our listening tour that just haven't been engaged meaningfully yet. And our goal through phase 2 is to make sure that they're brought forth. And so that's going to shape a lot of the content that we're sharing and the conversations that we want to have. But we also want to provide an opportunity for kind of continued detailed technical conversations, focused conversations for those folks who may have a desire to get into the details a little bit more. So we want to understand how to make sure that the process is mutually valuable, how that the information is accessible and relatable. And then finally, again, balancing the needs of people who don't know what questions to ask yet, with those who are local experts and really have a lot to provide in terms of technical insight and experience. So those are our challenges, and I think we can continue to talk about those as we move through here. Again, just a quick reminder on the toolkit. As we discussed in November, the virtual setting, I think it makes it easier for people to participate because they can just tune into a Zoom meeting, but it also makes it harder to get meaningful input and conversation during those opportunities. So what we're finding through our other projects is that there's no one size fits all approach. We have to have a variety of different tools and activities to really meet people where they're at and provide multiple opportunities for people to provide input and perspectives. So I would say that the open house on January 28th is an important milestone and an opportunity for community-wide conversation, but it is not the only way in which we will, be able to share information and speak with the community. So we'll continue to look for multiple pathways and opportunities. Provisionally planned activities to that point. So the website is a key portal of information through which we'll be sharing updates. I'll talk a little bit more about the engagement application that we'll be launching on January 28th. Social media, obviously a key tool, the public open house. Then targeted conversations. So we want to continue to have those one-on-ones or those small group conversations. And then the idea of the quote unquote meeting in a bag. So developing a toolkit of materials that each CRAC member, for example, could go out and actually host smaller meetings with their neighborhood association, collect feedback, and then share that with Vince and our team here, so we can integrate it in the process. And this is, really about multiplying the breadth of our engagement strategy. This slide wasn't shared in advance. We were still refining it, but just a little bit about what we're thinking about in terms of structure for the January 28th open house. We want to have a presentation, obviously, to the community to update them on what the CRP is, what its goals and objectives and schedule are. We want to provide a sort of, in the interest of being accessible and inclusive of people who have not been at the table before, provide really a resilience 101. Make sure people understand, what does sea level rise mean? What are the risks that Nantucket faces? What are the toolkits and options for addressing this risk? So making sure that people really feel empowered to understand, what this process is about and where it will lead. And then once we have this sort of introduction, we do want to break out into smaller groups for a structured exercise, which we're still developing, but it'll be an opportunities for feedback on key questions, identifying community concerns and challenges, and corroborating the sort of initial findings. And then separate from the open house, again, we do want to have multiple ways to get involved. So we've been discussing the idea of kind of smaller group coffee chats, quote unquote, with subject matter experts for folks who may want to really talk about their concerns about erosion or sea level rise or critical infrastructure. And then finally, the sort of virtual toolkit. So using the application and the mapping and surveying capacities that it provides to allow people to engage with the process, no matter where they are. Whether they're on island or they are elsewhere in the world, they can engage with this process through the application. We are, working this week to launch our full-scale advertisement for the Nantucket open house, for the Coastal Resilience Plan open house. These are some advertisements that or promotional materials that we've developed, and we have final versions that Vince will be using to post to social media and elsewhere today, and we'll share these with Crack as well to make sure that you can share these out with your networks. I'm not sure if everybody had a chance to look at this video, but I'm gonna actually you won't be able to hear the music, I don't think, but I'm gonna switch to my web browser here, if I may, and play this video for you. So just give me a moment to share a different window. Okay, so this is an application that Arcadis has partnered with a company called Iris to develop. It is intended specifically for community engagement, and we have developed it for resilience planning projects. Nantucket will actually be the first place that the application is launched, and January 28th will be the first time that it's available in the App Store. So I think it's a really exciting opportunity to have this brand new piece of technology that is available for providing input, and we can share more information as we further, sort of refine the final product. I would say that, again, not everybody loves using apps on their smartphone. This isn't the only way that people will engage. It's one tool that we have at our disposal. So it's not the only thing, but I think it's an exciting way for some folks to be involved. So I'll just play this quickly here. All right, I'm going to share back to the presentation now.
I think that's going to be a very useful tool because there are plenty of people who are more likely to engage via an app on a phone than in some of the traditional formats that we use in town government.
That's great to hear. That's been our experience so far, is that I think, digital applications are an important way for, especially I think, younger generations and those who just don't necessarily have the time or capacity to attend a community meeting to quickly provide their perspective on a project.
Would you mind if I asked a super quick question, Mary?
Go ahead, Vince.
Thank you. Trevor, a request and a question as well. The request, can you send me the link for that video potentially so that I could share it with Crack members, please?
We have it, Vince. It was in the packet. Yeah.
That's nice and easy then. And the second, and my question then, I never thought to ask this before in all the conversations we had about it. Is this only going to be for iPhone, or will it be for other platforms as well?
You know what, let me confirm, but I'm almost certain that it's for Android and iPhone, so it'll be available in both app stores. So again, I think these are some considerations that we've been contemplating as we've been kind of developing our strategy here for phase 2, and also thinking about how to make sure that we're getting enough kind of awareness of the upcoming process throughout the community. Just in the interest of time, I won't read these, but these are the important or sort of preliminary important considerations that we want to try to address through our next couple of weeks of outreach to the community. And then I think one of the best ways to get people to engage in a process is to communicate why it's valuable for them to do so. And so we've been thinking about how can we make sure that the process is participating in this engagement, any engagement activities for either January through September, make sure that those are valuable to those who are involved, and particularly with everything that's happening in the world, there's a lot of competing priorities. There's a lot of people have a lot of concerns right now, and so making sure that we're kind of demonstrating that value as we go out to the community. So populated on this slide are a number of kind of initial ideas that we developed, but I can pause here and see if any members of the CRAC have other ideas about what might be valuable, what might be a reason for somebody to participate in the process.
Jen, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Trevor. I just had two quick comments that kind of a little bit feed into the conversation that was happening earlier. But two of the things I identified was that maybe focusing on places that interest people, that emotional tie-in, and that kind of goes back to what Gary had been saying earlier and others, as far as the making that risk known for the people that maybe aren't necessarily on an eroding bank or in a place that floods every day, so that emotional buy-in tie-in might be a way to make sure people are focused on what's happening. And the other thing was that, making sure that, everyone has their own particular special interest that they're involved in, that they're focused on, that their business is focused around, and knowing that if they're part of the conversation now, that we're going to be building into solutions and things that are coming up at annual town meeting that we're going to have to vote on, like all those pieces of the democratic process that we do so well on Nantucket. This is the start of that conversation. And so maybe focusing to those special interest groups, here's how you are moving your pieces of the conversation forward now. Those are just two things that I thought were worth bringing up.
Peter?
My ideas are going to come across as a little crazy, I guess, but and I don't know if Trevor or the team or Vincent has the time, but it might be worth scanning the various review boards' agendas and then picking the right meetings to go to where applications for development within high impact zones are happening, and attend those meetings. And at the appropriate moment during the public hearing, introduce yourself, mention the plan as best you can, and say how the developer or whoever that is needs to work to make the project as sea level rise resistant as possible. If anything else, you're getting into the public record. There's maybe a reporter there that's doing a story, which means you might generate comments from the planning board or the HDC or the Concom that would then go into the record or make it into a story, which then everybody would read. I don't know, it's a long shot, but you might find that there are projects that are happening that are really going to be impacted by sea level rise. And even though we've done our interim suggestions, recommendations to the review boards, having somebody actually at the meeting puts a face to all that. And then I know this is all of us voters that are going to decide what things might need to go to town meeting and what things are going to be voted on. But still, we got to consider the visitors, a way to reach out to the visitors on a level that maybe scares them enough to pay attention. And likewise, for the people that live here, you got to find a tangible way to maybe scare them a little bit. I think we talked a little bit about several months ago, other communities that are facing sea level rise that placed, I don't know whether they were lasers or lights, but they shone on buildings all the time, showing you how high the water would go if something like that existed all the time. And then strategically placed kiosks explaining it. All right, that's it.
Thank you, Peter. Sarah?
Hi, yeah, I think everyone's had made some really great suggestions, and I think just to paint a broad brush, the scare tactics definitely work for some people, and thought of like losing something that you're interested in, whether it's obviously your home is impacted, or if it's a place you love to go, or a playground, or, you know, there's all those different things. But I think Mary said this earlier, in the earlier conversation, about spinning the positive side of it too, of maybe what economic benefits there are to adopting certain things. Or I definitely think that we should show the potential impact so people are aware, for many obvious reasons. But in terms of the other parts of participation and how it can be valuable, maybe for the trades or for certain industries, if there's not a positive spin, but if there's things that we can put, like maybe a positive economic aspect on it, or other ways that people can be involved. I don't know what those are, but that's just one other aspect to add.
So I'll follow up on that, Sarah. I was going to suggest that, you know, all of us on the island are affected to some degree, and some of us realize it more than others, by the fact that we live here. But many people will be affected in their livelihood by climate change and sea level rise. And so that's another way of messaging to get people's attention. You know, what is it going to look like to be a landscaper 25 years from now? Can we create programs for landscapers to have them provide additional services that help, you know, somebody's property better resist the effects of water, whether that's tidal flooding or stormwater, or a rising wetland coming in? You know, as Sarah was saying, you know, what are the opportunities that we have here? And also note from the previous slide, you were asking, are we reaching all relevant organizations? I'm just going to reiterate the Builders Association, the Realtors Association. I don't think there's a Landscapers Association, but I know that they work with the Natural Resources Department, so maybe they can be reached there. I think that, you know, looking at this from a business perspective is definitely got to be part of the approach. There was someone else with a hand up. I'm sorry, did I miss someone? Peter, go ahead. I don't see any other hands.
I just wanted to follow up what Sarah said. All I meant was about scaring was to sort of get people in the door, and then all the positive could come. Maybe not scare, but maybe more like a reality check to make sure that they're understanding us.
Thank you, Peter. Other comments for Trevor? All right, Trevor, do you want to move on?
Yes, great comments. I think that's, I particularly like the not scare tactics, but just making sure people understand the urgency, right? That this is serious, and that, you know, there's an opportunity to influence the future trajectory. So that's a great point. So I'm a little bit concerned about time here. I really don't want to impinge upon Lisa's time. So what I might suggest, I think it's critically important that we kind of look through this table together, but we do want to talk about evaluation criteria, and I do just want to give an update on the process as well. Mary and Vince, would it make sense if folks can provide input on the evaluation criteria by email to me, or I'm happy to come back to the next CRAC meeting and we can talk about them then.
I think that we can push this to the next CRAC meeting, which should be 2 weeks from today. That's the 26th. That will still be in advance of the 28th.
Yep.
With the open meeting.
Okay.
And I'm happy to reserve that time on the next agenda. Vince, do we have any reason not to offer that?
No.
Okay.
Could we also offer that if CRAC members did want to submit things to speed it along on the 28th, so that they could submit things in writing? I'm happy to facilitate that, obviously.
Yes, absolutely. Sarah, comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to confirm, are we saying that we're going to be commenting on the engagement piece that's right in front of us, or the evaluation piece? Like, what's being postponed, both?
The evaluation piece.
Okay.
Yep. So,
Thank you.
I think to Vince's point, we would love to get any comments, language changes, viewpoints via email prior to the next crack meeting, but we can certainly present then as well.
So I think, Trevor, if you can provide an email to Vince, which he will share out with specifically what you're looking for,
Yes.
then we can be prepared for the next meeting to respond.
Okay,
All right,
perfect.
I think that makes sense. Okay, so go ahead with the
Okay.
remainder.
Yeah, so what, oh, excuse me. So what I'd like to do is kind of walk through each of these rows, and these are some partner, on the first column are partners / stakeholders who we think may be difficult to bring into the fold, may not have been as closely engaged in prior planning processes, maybe sort of non-experts, if you will, around coastal resilience. And so I want to kind of walk through each row and discuss what the CRAC's views on how to engage these groups might be. And I'd love for volunteers from the committee to take on the responsibility to some extent of kind of helping us shape the outreach to those groups, and maybe reaching out to some of the key partners who we can help to engage them, really multiplying the work that Vince and our team can do as well. So,
Trevor, can I offer a comment on that first column, partner
yes.
stakeholder? Well, two comments really. The first is that the Spanish-speaking residents are not monolithic. There's a large group from El Salvador, which is very different than the large group from Costa Rica, which is different than the group from Mexico. We can't assume that we will reach them all in one outreach. I don't really know how to solve that. I'll also note there's a Portuguese-speaking group from Brazil and from Portugal as well. And the second one is, I like that you have the Bulgarian group. And again, I don't know how monolithic or diverse that group might be, but there's also a significant Jamaican group here. And that's something to keep in mind. And there may be other Caribbean islands, but I think Jamaica is probably the best represented. So just 2 notes on that. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So is there anybody who has additional thoughts on the Spanish-speaking residents? Great note, Mary, about the not being monolithic, and certainly that's true, but additional thoughts on how we can effectively reach those residents?
Sarah?
Yeah, so the 2 groups that I was thinking of that are potential to reach out is the Athenaeum is not on here, and they run the an English language learner program, and so it's a lot of I know someone who has been part of it and volunteered at it, and I know there's a lot of Spanish speakers, but it's people with lots of diverse backgrounds who are coming here to work usually and are learning English. So that might be a place that has access to a lot of different communities. That might be possible. And then the other one is the Nantucket Community School. So they, in my experience through my job, I work with them mostly with their with children, but they do a lot with the Spanish-speaking community, getting kids ready for kindergarten, for example. So I think having access to families, and they're a trusted organization, they might be a great way to distribute materials, for example.
Great, that's super helpful.
Eric?
Yes, go ahead, Fritz.
With respect to the Jamaican population, I see for the Spanish speaking, you have the Catholic Church. A lot of the Jamaican population attends or participates in what is the New Life Ministry. The New Life Ministry operates out of St. Paul's Episcopal Church. They have their services, and I'm not sure what's happening in the COVID era, but pre-COVID, they would have their services typically on Sunday afternoons, and I think Tuesdays and Thursday evenings. But that is a separate church organization that specifically involves a lot of the Jamaican population.
Thank you, Fritz.
Very helpful.
Other thoughts? I also made a note, Trevor, that unfortunately the town did not yet fill the diversity, equity, and inclusion position.
Yeah.
But perhaps the new Health and Human Services Director could substitute if he's not completely occupied with COVID.
Sure.
And that's Jericho Mealy.
Yeah, and I think also, again, hopefully that office is stood up and the there's a person leading it at some point during this process, and so we'll continue to keep an eye on that as we go.
Mary?
Yes,
I'm
Lisa,
gonna
please go
interrupt.
ahead.
I want to go back to one of the comments I think I heard from Peter. Just a thought on this, Trevor. Visitors, they are a stakeholder group, and on that issue of creating some sense of urgency or just basic awareness of the threats to a place that they hold dear. I know they're seasonal residents, but I think visitors are a whole separate entity.
Yeah, and I think that's really challenging, right? Because you have groups, you have visitors who come each year, right? And then you have visitors who may come irregularly or, haven't visited yet, but want to. So reaching visitors is, I think, a real challenge. I guess, the tourism office is obviously one way in which to do that. But
I think, to the cultural organizations, the museums, the Athenaeum, all of those visitors often come for particular, even though we're in COVID, I apologize for that. But the fact is they spend time at cultural events, activities on that line.
Yep. And I think there's, probably as we get into the tourism season, COVID notwithstanding, of course, but, simple things like flyering, if there are sandwich boards or places that people go as soon as they get off the ferry, right? Making sure that we're advertising our events in those locations. That I think sometimes it's as simple as making sure you're kind of checking those easy boxes as well.
Trevor, I was going to add, yes, you have the category of workers who live off island, and flyering, if it wasn't COVID, would probably be good, but we might have to just deal with signs at the steamship, at the High Line, and at the airport. But I want to caution you that we do have a sign advisory committee and regulations regarding signs, and I think sandwich boards are not allowed.
Yep.
So make sure that we don't cross any lines we shouldn't be crossing there.
Comply with sign
Yes.
laws. Got it.
Peter, do you have a comment? And then Sarah.
Yes. In terms of trying to reach people as they're coming to the islands, anytime a lot of people book online and then you get an email from the ferry service that you're booking with. And I don't know how it would work with the airlines, but I'm sure we can start with the 2 ferry services, or the 4 ferry services actually, that are coming here when we're the busiest. And whatever information we want people to have could be in the form of maybe a 1-sheet document that when you got the email, you'd get our message, a basic message, but then it would have the links to all the, the website and all the information and upcoming meetings, and just for awareness, I'm sure the ferries would cooperate. I don't know.
And Trevor, just to note, we're not seeing your presentation full screen. We're seeing the line of slides down the side.
Yep, that's fine, because I'm taking
Okay.
notes in here in real time. If that's okay, I just want to make sure to show what I'm recording.
Okay, and Sarah had a comment, and then I see some other comments as well.
Yeah, so my comment just was jumping off what Lisa was saying about visitors, and for what it's worth, whether it's here or somewhere else, when we, as at my organization, when we did surveys, for example, of like who attended our programming, we broke it down where people identified themselves as like, year-round residents, seasonal residents, and then we broke down visitors into summer visitors, like more than 2 weeks or less than 2 weeks, because I think there's a lot of people that we know that come here, as Lisa was saying, that maybe they rent a house for 1 week every single year, and they're only here a week in the summer, but Nantucket is like their special place or something. And obviously their input might be weighted differently, but it is still useful information if they and maybe it's like we're not super targeting those groups, but those people might have something to add or say, or what they value because what their economic dollars are important. So just if there's future surveys that go out, maybe that's some kind of distinction of how people identify with how, because if we're going to be pushing a lot of things out through social media, different groups and everything, knowing the people, the level of visitation to Nantucket would be helpful.
Thank you, Sarah. Bruce, you had a comment to offer. You need to unmute. Bruce, you're still muted. There you go.
Thank
Bruce
you.
Mandel.
Thank you. I noticed on this chart, down at the bottom, second row from the bottom, neighborhood associations. And I'd like to suggest an early engagement with the Nantucket Civic Association, which is a federation of more than 20 neighborhood associations. And the reason I'm suggesting early, like now, is that they could get the word out to all of their associations. And you'd be surprised that some of these associations are composed almost entirely of seasonal residents. So it's a good way for them to get the word out before the meeting of the 28th. And I think that would be an interesting way to do it. They have co-presidents, Charlie Stott and Peter Morrison, who could help us with that. And the other comment I have, I've heard mentioned several times concerns about Nantucket and low-lying communities and more risky communities and other communities. Right now, the town is engaged in redesigning the two critical bridges that help function as a link from Nantucket and the rest of the island. And the design is refusing to take into account sea level rise. And I think that we'd be better deal with that now while we're redesigning and then rebuilding the bridges now than having to face it in 10 or 15 years to redesign and rebuild those bridges again. And I don't know who on this call could help with that, but I think that's very important. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. We have Holly, who has some comments. I see Gary's hand. Trevor, I know that we are running out of time. So I think we're going to cut that off after Holly. And then just a reminder to everybody, you can send comments by email to Vince and to Trevor so that they can be incorporated in the planning.
Yes, I just wanted to make a comment about your partner list to include our cultural heritage folks. Obviously the Visitor Center, the Culture and Tourism, but also the NHA, the Nantucket Historical Association, Nantucket Preservation Trust. I know I'm forgetting some others. Preservation Institute Nantucket through the University of Florida, been here since '72. Those cultural institutions I think will be great. There's also folks that do walking tours outside of those cultural institutes that could provide additional information. Of course, there's people that come to Nantucket specifically to experience obviously our history. To get their input would be beneficial. Thanks.
Thank you, Holly. Okay, Trevor, we're at 11:23 on my clock, so we need to wrap up to give Lisa time for her presentation.
Sounds good. Do you mind if I just run through a couple update slides on that weren't shared in advance, just kind of on our next steps around risk and vulnerability? It'll take under 5 minutes, if that's okay, or I can share out the slides afterwards.
I want to make sure that Lisa has the opportunity. So since we are continuing to the next meeting, is that something that you can present then?
Yep, that's totally fine.
Okay, so
all right.
I'm going to turn over to Lisa at this point, and she has a presentation from the Resilient Nantucket Design for Adaptation project, which is ongoing.
Thanks, Mary. Let me share that with you. Okay. I think before I start this, I'm going to take this opportunity to segue into some of the stuff that was discussed, the issues brought up, and what was really a great conversation, I think, in this meeting. I'm going to talk about a couple of things that came to mind that you could actually are incorporated in some way in this toolkit, but also create opportunities as the CRAC and the HDC and other of the key players on the island move forward with next phases of planning, MVP grants. What are the kinds of tools that we need yet, or what are the resources that we need more information about so we can continue to move on? And one of the comments was made about, the sense of urgency, as Trevor put it, which is the way I always put it. And Peter, you said it in the correct way also. We need to scare people sometimes. The concept is economics. And as Mary said, it's profit motives. It's not a bad thing. Business communities looking for profit. We're all looking for profit when it comes to our property values on our homes or our commercial properties. So there's two studies that have come out, or one study that just came out recently from the Urban Land Institute, which we'll be including in the toolkit, that talks about the economics of building or development as it relates to flooding and adaptation, why it's critical for communities, not just real estate or builders, to understand that the community receives value with a well-designed or thought out adaptation strategy for real estate. And secondly, the project that I just finished in St. Augustine, we looked at the economics, the economic consequences of not addressing issues that are climate impacts, increasing storm damage and so forth, and what that means for the real estate community and the tourism community in that St. Augustine, and how that can be tied to models for other communities who are tourism reliant or have strong real estate values that they need to protect. So there is information out there, and it has been something I think all along as part of the Resilient Nantucket. We've talked about the need for an economic study of the value of historic places, historic communities, natural resources in these communities that are hit with sea level rise and flooding. So just a couple of thoughts on that before moving into our toolkit. This is, as most of you know, Resilient Nantucket, designed for adaptation, is two parts: a resilience toolkit as well as a comprehensive set of supplemental design guidelines for building with Nantucket in mind. Just to give you some idea of our progress and how this is integrating into the Coastal Resilience Plan. We're about midway through the process. We've done a community forum. We've done a community charrette dealing with design guidance. We are now in the process of finalizing the Nantucket Resilience Toolkit, hence why I'm presenting to you today to get additional thoughts from you at the very end about anything that you may need to see to be better prepared. We'll be developing draft design guidelines, working with Thomason and Associates in February. The final guidelines will be available in March. And importantly, our final community forum for Resilient Nantucket, at which a number of people on this call we've invited to present, will be hosted. What's important about that is I think there were a couple of ideas that came up today where we will have speakers already committed. I'll name just a couple because I think it ties very much to the work of CRAC and the community or the Coastal Resilience Plan. One gentleman, Phil Dyke, is a coastal advisor to the National Trust UK. Now, it's a bigger island, I realize, than Nantucket, but they do own 10% of England's shoreline, and their mission is specifically the natural and the cultural heritage of the UK. So they have done a series of reports, and they've been dealing with things like managed retreat, understanding that we may need to prepare certain areas of the coast for a natural recession of the wetlands. We make choices about what properties we may need to lose as the owner of those coastal resources. Some of them are tourism related. They do a lot of community engagement to work with the community, help them better understand how they're dealing with managed retreat over 100 or year period, for example. So Phil will come and talk about everything from the protection of habitat to the preservation of heritage tourism. So he'll be participating. Sandra Fatorik is a scholar at the University or at the Delft University of Technology in the Netherlands. She'll be talking about some of the work she's been doing there in terms of studying the importance of cultural resources in relationship to the ever-present resilience work going on, obviously, in the Netherlands. John Englander is an oceanographer and sea level rise expert. He'll talk about the concept of moving to higher ground, how we may need to prepare, how we become more resilient. And then Erin Seekamp is with the College of Natural Resources at North Carolina State University. She will also be talking about some of the work she's been doing with the National Park Service and how, again, tourism for sites that are important to the Park Service and to the communities that they serve is addressed. So just a few of the speakers. We'll be bringing in some outside. I hope also to be talking with others in the community. We have a number of people identified. And Peter, I actually may follow up with you on some thoughts. So that is where we are with our last event for the community forum. The purpose of this resilience toolkit is basically to provide information to the whole community on these particular bullets: flood risk, how you prepare, what the importance and value of insurance is, how you recover after events, and then in general, adaptation for historic properties and cultural resources, because that is, again, what our purview was under the MVP grant. Also, though, it's important to me, I deal with communities on a regular basis and present. I'm doing a presentation to Rotary for New Bern, North Carolina shortly. And I talk about the importance of personal preparedness. Have you prepared? Is your family prepared? Is your business prepared with a plan for a future of changing climate and emergencies? And the emphasis is on, much as we've been talking about with communities and community engagement in Nantucket, whole community, looking at whole community planning. It's a system of dealing with individuals, families, businesses, all of those stakeholders that are key to communicating and implementing adaptation in terms of preparedness planning. The organization of this toolkit, as Kim, and I want to make sure everyone knows, Kimberly Rose, who is the head of Acclimate and has previously worked in the PIN program. Kim and I have put together this toolkit of resources, and I think we nicely have developed a framework to help people understand that we move in these processes, whether we're dealing with research or government regulations or funding, we move from federal to state to local to the individual property owner to the individual themselves. So the concept here is that we need to ensure that everyone, again, back to whole community, but everybody understands that we do try to develop planning and recovery efforts that tie in to what the higher priorities goals are of the next step up in the chain. So I do think it's critical for us to reach out to our partners at the state level and the federal level, just as we've done in the past with Resilient Nantucket through the MVP program, to either gather information on best practices and models, understand the priority of those partners, or communicate to those partners what our priorities are. We close this toolkit out with a series of small appendices. Again, a big stress on the importance of having flood insurance, a resilience glossary, which we're continuing to build and define terms that are common in Nantucket, and then basically flood maps that are available and out there, and what we've been looking at currently in terms of firms, but also projections, the visualizations, for example, that we've seen through the PIN program. So just a sampling, this is not all inclusive. I'm just going to hit on a couple of bullet points under each of those gatherings of federal, state, local, and so forth. So a couple resources that are available, particularly those of us working in preservation who understand that we do have to address issues of federal regulations when we're dealing with specifically structural adaptation. The Advisory Council on Historic Preservation has developed sustainability and climate resilience information and resources. The Environmental Protection Agency has climate change resilience and adaptation specific to New England. These are all links in the toolkit that are available for access by our local government and anyone else interested in using them. The funding programs, BRIC, which is through the Federal Emergency Management Agency. The National Park Service has coastal facilities vulnerability assessments, how you assess coastal facilities and the protocols for doing so. And then the National Center for Technology and Training looks at climate change and cultural landscapes. I think we've talked repeatedly about the value of understanding the relationship between the built and the natural environment in Nantucket. And NCPTT provides a blueprint for that. Looking at state resources that are available, the Coordinated Statewide Emergency Preparedness Program addresses climate change in Massachusetts. The Department of Transportation has statewide climate change objectives. The Office of Coastal Zone Management, which we've worked with a lot in Nantucket, has its own analysis of coastal landscapes and what make for storm smart coasts. Something we don't often see and we need to see more frequently taken advantage of in Nantucket is the Massachusetts Historic Rehabilitation Tax Credit, which can support adaptation of historic buildings looking to stay in place and not retreat. No, we cannot move downtown. We need to protect and adapt downtown. Other resources for local governments and cultural institutions. FEMA has a communication toolkit. If we want to talk about how we communicate to people, FEMA has a guide for how decision makers and community leaders can start talking about the importance of flooding resilience and the urgency of it. As well, there is a completely online tool available to cultural organizations, archives, libraries called D-Plan. And this is something that was developed by the Institute for Museum and Library Services, as well as the National Center for Preservation, Technology and Training. It is an online emergency preparedness guide for cultural institutions to ensure that they are prepared, as well as being, as well as planning for recovery in the event of flooding and hurricane disasters. And then even more importantly, the town itself has on its website past presentations. We had done a presentation previously as part of the Community Forum 1 on the issue of flood insurance, on the issue of adaptation measures. What is going on in the state of Massachusetts, for example? We had Shannon Holtz come and present on what was going on in the Cape. Are there best practices and examples that can be adopted for Nantucket? So we have resources already on the town's website. I encourage you, if you haven't looked at the Resilient Nantucket page, to do so. And then when it comes to property owners, commercial property owners, real estate interests and the like, we have other resources that are available. If you need to understand how to better adapt your building without doing an elevation, or how to protect utilities, the property owners can access this information, again, in this toolkit directly to these website locations and download these publications to better understand how to protect properties. The Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety is a private 501c3 organization. They have a huge amount of information and resources available to property owners. Also, FEMA has a home builder's guide to coastal Contracting. So we talk about our builders communities, doing a training for them. There's resources available for them. And maybe you don't know this, but the Small Business Administration provides grants and has a checklist for property owners, whether you own a commercial property or not. So they are a resource for preparedness planning. Building community resilience with nature-based solutions. We've talked about that as a priority. The Risk Map program through FEMA has developed guidance for that for local communities. This is something we can take a look at and see what is relevant to Nantucket. And then of course, the National Park Service has recently come out with flooding adaptation approaches that work for historic properties. And we're very much basing our design guidance for Nantucket on that. Lastly, as I mentioned, it's about the money. In many instances, we know some of the things that can be done. What can we do as private property owners to fund some of those efforts? So in a post-event situation, there is disaster loan assistance, as I said, through the SBA, and it is for property owners, period, not just those that have not just those that have commercial properties. The plan to plan section in the toolkit is just that. How do I start planning my effort? What are the tools I need? So again, I start with, as an individual, are you disaster ready? FEMA has a site that tells you how to make a family emergency plan. In terms of materials, what do I need to know about the type of materials that I can use in special flood hazard areas that meet the National Flood Insurance Program requirements? And then finally, what is going on in the state? What are the updates I need to be aware of? Obviously, Massachusetts Coastal Erosion Hazard Map is going to be something that is going to be incorporated into the coastal resilience planning efforts. So we'll be made more aware of what the state mapping is showing and what modeling and visualizations are that are currently out there. So I think that gives you a sample of the items in the toolkit. And what I really wanted to do was just collect some information. I've gotten some already, I've written down based on our conversation. But I guess my key question to the crack is, what are the resources that you would want to look for to use in developing your own personal preparedness plans for coastal resilience, whether it's you or your families, whether it's your business, your civic organization? That's kind of the question, Mary, I leave the group with and ask for your response. And thank you for letting me share with you what it is that we're providing as part of the Resilient Nantucket work.
Thank you, Lisa. One idea that I had as you were talking is that we have maps and we have charts that tell us what might happen with sea level rise or with storm surge. I think it might be interesting to have a story, to have, what's going to happen in, before 2100, to have it in a narrative form rather than in a numbers form.
Okay.
I think that might be something that helps people who process information differently, absorb that information.
That's great.
Other comments from committee members? Yes, Sarah.
Mary, I think your point is really well made. Yeah, everybody processes information differently, and we have a lot of visuals in general with like charts and maps and things like that, but that story portion I think is really, your point is really well taken. And I think a lot of us remember the first time we saw the University of Florida's predicted sea level rise imagery, and that was very striking to a lot of people, especially in areas that you care about around the town. I think along those lines, but maybe scaled back. So a lot of the, I know I've used those when I've gave presentations and used the highest scenario and the longest duration to show the extent of it. But to your point with what do you look for in developing your own preparedness? In my own home, I don't think of 100 years out and the most dire situation. I think, what am I going to do in the next 5 to 10 years, around my own yard? And so I think that similar types of visuals on shorter time frame that are, people can like think more seriously about for that like individual planning phase might be interesting.
Great, thanks, Sarah.
Other comments? Also, the opportunity for members of the public to comment if they wish to. Again, you can send me a chat message if you don't have the video on, or if you're not being seen, please just go ahead and give a shout out. Lisa, one as I'm thinking about story, we've kind of looked at it as, 30 years is the length of a mortgage and 2100 is the end of the century. And I'm thinking, well, what would the experience be for somebody who was born in 2020? 20 years from now, when they're graduating from college, what's their experience? Talking to their grandparent, what's different from their grandparents' time? As they raise a family themselves and as they reach the end of their life, what's the change been in their lifetime? That might be one way to present a story.
And to that point, Mary, I'm going to just make a comment again. I'm constantly thinking of the next phase of the MVP grant funds to get this information out. But I think we've found and story mapping tools, these geographically based story mapping tools that take the maps, but then they show you a particular resource and they can progress to what it's going to look like in the future. And, we can maybe tell a story about the various options, that a property owner, to Sarah's point, what can I do in the next 5 to 10 years? Well, this is the 5 to 10 year, but maybe this is the 30-year option. And then, what other things can we talk about later on? One of the things, and this in the Brown Point discussion, I think it's relevant. In working with Newport, there was the development in its Point neighborhood of a kind of a memory program. The idea being that that particular neighborhood is going to be gone. And how they address that and embrace it in the future and imprint it is something that they worked with the Rhode Island School of Design on. And they basically took that neighborhood and its footprint. They built barrier systems, in essence, and echoed the walls. So you could see an actual footprint of what was there before they basically had to abandon that neighborhood and relocate themselves, or in instances or properties physically elsewhere into Newport. And what it left was an imprint on the ground that they turned into a nature-based environment. It was about letting the grass go, about letting the wetlands come back, but with that physical imprint there. So sometimes it's wonderful to have partnerships with these academic institutions that are really thinking outside of the box. And I think maybe that's the type of thing we could move forward with, understanding that we want to somehow or another protect that imprint of our sense of place on a landscape, even if we cannot physically in 100 years anticipate a building is still there.
Well, my favorite spot on the island is the old mill, and thankfully it's on very high ground. So any other comments from committee members or the public? Lisa, can you talk just another minute more about the next time that you'll be coming back to the public? Do you have that scheduled, or what's their opportunity?
I think when we do the presentation in April, but other than that, I'm going to the HDC at the end of this week to do a much more detailed presentation on the toolkit. It'll have much more information about the particular resources that we're including and a stronger emphasis on the historic preservation elements of those. Beyond that, there is going to be a presentation to the HDC at some point, probably in February or March, on the design, the draft design guidelines, and that will be a public meeting. And then the major community forum event being that April 23rd and 24th occasion. We'll be doing that in partnership with the town of Nantucket, also with the Coastal Resilience Planning Effort, MVP, the Nantucket Preservation Trust, Preservation Massachusetts, who's interested, and the Massachusetts Historical Commission. So that will be the next and the last event related to the Resilient Nantucket plan.
Okay, and then Holly, is there anything you want to add there?
I do. Thank you, Lisa, so much. So glad you're able to come present to the Coastal Resiliency Advisory Committee on this important effort. Yes, Lisa will be before HDC this Friday. We have a special meeting specifically for them and for this effort in resiliency. And then we have a time in February and in March. We're looking at basically Fridays, and I can actually send those time frames available. They're actually on the HDC's calendar that's been adopted, so I can send that all to you so you have it. But yes, we are looking forward to the HDC's engagement with this important project. So thank you very much. Appreciate the committee on this.
Thank you, Holly. Kim, did you have anything to add? I wasn't sure. No, okay. And Matt, please go ahead.
Just a comment. We have a strong historical commission, active historical commission. Will they be involved when at the same meeting as HDC, or how will their input be gathered?
Yes, through you, Mary.
Yes.
Matt, yes, we have invited the historical commission. They're involved. As a matter of fact, they are posted just in case that meeting has a quorum. But yes, they will be available to attend if they so desire. They are part of this engagement. Absolutely.
Great, thank you, Holly. Right, Lisa, thank you. I'm sure those of us that are interested will pay attention when you're presenting to HTC, and I hope that you get good engagement going forward, as does the Coastal Resilience Plan. So it's good to see all of this happening at the same time. Turning to the next item on our agenda, are there any members of the public that would like to offer comments to the committee today? Okay, I'm not seeing anybody, but if you are trying to get the opportunity to speak, just let me know either via chat or if you have video, raising your hand. Do we have committee reports from our Planning Board, CONCOM, Harbor and Shellfish Advisory Board, Select Board, or Advisory Committee of Non-Voting Taxpayers? Excuse me, I know some of those boards have met with Arcadis, and I didn't know if they wanted to offer this committee any feedback from those meetings. Excuse me, Fritz, go ahead.
Yes, Arcadis met with the Planning Board, made a very nice presentation. Fortunately, the Planning Board had a number of continuances, so that we had an abundance of time to actually devote to it, rather than typically we always feel pressured on time and pushing people to get through their agenda. Fortunately, that didn't happen last night, and there was plenty of opportunity for people to hear. There really hasn't been any feedback. It's too early. I know that Trevor's also met, I think, with the planning staff, but I'm not privy to whatever they gathered or gained from those meetings. But for the time being, planning is just, I think we're just sort of waiting to see what suggestions or possibilities we will be considering later on when the plan is finalized.
Thank you, Fritz. I was able to attend that meeting, and I had two major takeaways. One is that several members of the Planning Board expressed appreciation that this is an island-wide effort, not just focused on town or focused on hotspots. And just one more time, I think that is really, truly an important part of the Coastal Resilience Plan. The other was the suggestion that we might need to look at requesting changes in state law in order to facilitate some of the projects the comment was made that right now permitting for coastal projects is on a property by property basis. Well, if you have a regional project, that's an awful lot of permits. Is there any way that we can streamline that? And that might be a state law that needs to be changed. Vince, do you have a comment there?
Yeah, I was doing some checking and correcting for myself from last night, Mary. It's on a project by project basis. If the project crosses boundary lines, you have to get all the people to with property ownership to agree. But if, say, you're doing a very similar project but in a different area, you still have to get a new permit because the same project might have a different effect in a different area.
That's great clarification. Thank you, Vince. Matt, did you want to offer any of the select board's reaction to Arcadis' presentation to them?
I think we've covered it. I thought it was a good presentation.
Thank you, Matt. Other comments from other boards? I think Peter, your Harbor and Shellfish Advisory Board is meeting with Arcadis later.
Yes, Arcadis is meeting with us on the 19th. And I've endeavored to, with the help of Vincent, get the links for past and upcoming meetings for our members to attend so that they can get a sense of what's going on and then be able to formulate comments and questions. So they've, I know from emails that they've been doing that. And then just to mention this, some of you probably know that the land bank's legal situation with neighbors of Petrel Landing slowly coming to a close, and they have plans for that part of Commercial Street, Commercial Wharf. Just something to consider. We're going to put in a comment letter. Our board is on what we'd like to see there, how we like them to develop it. But just something to make note of is that that's a development that will happen in another park that will be put down there. And as you probably know, it's pretty low to the ground and pretty close to the water. So it's a place that will probably get inundated fairly quickly. So.
Thank you, Peter. Gary, anything going on with the Advisory Committee of Non-Voting Taxpayers?
No comments. No.
Okay. And Ian had to drop off as a Conservation Commission member. Are there other committee members that have updates, Sarah?
So we no longer have the educational committee, but I did actually get an email requesting something from the educational subcommittee. So I don't know if we can put that on for next short bit for the next meeting.
We will, thank you.
Okay.
If you can forward that to Vince. Yeah.
Sure.
Other comments or questions, members of the committee or the public? Yes, Holly, please go ahead.
Just real quick, I also did want to mention that during the presentation on Friday, Trevor will actually be presenting as well. So DC will also be involved and notified at this particular meeting about the Coastal Resiliency Plan and how it ties in with the Resilient Nantucket effort.
Great, thank you, Holly.
Mm-hmm.
All right, if there are no other comments, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move. Second.
All right, thank you. All those in favor, roll call vote. Gary Beller.
Aye.
Sarah Boyce.
Aye.
Peter Brace. Peter.
Aye.
Thank you. Matt Fee.
Aye.
Jen Carberg.
Aye.
Fritz McClure.
Aye.
And chair votes aye. Thank you all. We'll see you in 2 weeks, Tuesday the 26th at 10 a.m.
Thank you.